I have conflicted emotions about them. I mean,
Yes.
they're really messed up, but they're also beautiful sometimes.
Mm.
There is a beauty in these places that we like forget about, where
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Current Art Podcast. I'm Yaching, and today we have a very special guest.
Hey, I'm Nate Dorr. I'm a filmmaker and photographer here in Brooklyn and wherever I can get to on a bike, essentially.
In last episode, filmmaker Nate Dorr introduces his new 16mm film, Chemical Meadows, an experimental documentary linking contaminated water chemistry and photochemistry in the post-industrial Meadowlands in New Jersey. Today's episode, we are going to discuss about the aftermath of the landscape and the effort to convey those observations to his viewers. Stay tuned and let's get started. You find a secret pathway to travel through those waters, and the most significant part is the sound. I think the uses of hydrophone and then to capture those underwater sound is also a very genius idea.
Thank you. Yeah, for a long time I didn't know what to do for sound for it because I use field recordings in a lot of my films, but the field recordings of the sound out there, you hear birds like anywhere.
Yes.
And some of that was interesting, and some of that is in the film. But the other sound you hear everywhere is cars.
Yeah.
There are so many highways in the Meadowlands. It's a place that people just pass through continuously and don't stop usually. So we've crisscrossed it with highways and roads, and that's what you hear is the Jersey Turnpike. A big question was what would be an interesting form of sound for it. And I had a breakthrough a while. I was sitting at a cafe with actually our friend Megan and Priska.
Oh.
Some friends from our grad program where they made this project.
Because this concept is overwhelming. So have you ever this kind of feeling that this would not work?
Well, the whole problem of the Meadowlands and the Anthropocene is definitely overwhelming, but that never was a problem for me making it. There's there's so much material. I mean, it's hard to know where to start, but there's so much you can do with it that I wasn't worried about not having a way to work with it. You know, I can always just pull things in and put them together in some way. So having an overwhelming problem was actually good in that sense. But technically, I wasn't sure it would work out at all. Like, I wasn't sure if the water would have an impact on the film. I wasn't sure if you'd actually be able to see the things that I was looking for. And then I just wouldn't have had a story. And then once I had my Lomo tank, like I said, I alluded to this earlier, but it doesn't work very well. Basically, when you're loading film, you have to clamp the film into this spiral between these two plates that have grooves in them.
Yeah.
And that keeps the film from sticking together. So then when you develop it, the water can touch all parts of the film.
Yes.
And the image develops properly. But the two plates in my Lomo tank don't fit together flushly. They're at an angle, which means there's more space on one side of the spiral than the other side, which means that the footage, if I'm not careful, jumps out of the tracks and then it sticks together or it bunches up in one track. And it's happening in the dark in a bag where I can't see it. So I can't tell what's happening unless I can feel it very precisely. So I had to learn to feel what the footage was doing, even though I couldn't see it. And again, that's why sometimes in the field it would take me hours just to load it in. And it didn't always work. And sometimes the footage did stick together and it generated these weird negative images and whatnot, which are also interesting documents of the process of making it. And some of those are in the film too. But for a while, I just thought, what if I can't make this work at all? And all my footage is just destroyed and nothing comes out at all. But I don't know, hours and hours and hours of practice got me to a point where it worked really well. And then I actually sanded down the plates by hand to make them sit more evenly, and that helped too. But I didn't dare do that I had to import this object from the Ukraine, so I couldn't get another one if I needed it very quickly. So I didn't want to mess with it, but it turned out that just physically sanding it down improved the situation.
Understand. So there's a lot of like trial and errors when processing the film. It's like we have been left with the aftermath. We haven't seen the destruction. We haven't seen the damage. We as this generation, at least for me as a person who moved in New York, like 3 years ago. So I've never seen when the damage has been done because it happens like decades ago.
Yeah.
So we are living in the aftermath somehow. And then that has also an effect on us. Like, I think visual art, film, is to at first perceive those little effects on people. And it's very connected with viewer experiences.
You talk about aftermath, and lately I think about afterlife a lot, not as a place we go after death, but as a state we can live in, like, while we're alive. Like, while I just said the Meadowlands are getting better, which is true, in full, everything's getting worse and worse, and we're not really doing anything about it. So I feel like we're going to be in a state of afterlife pretty soon. Just we'll be in this sort of afterlife of the biosphere where humans will probably be around for a while longer. I think we'll do just enough to continue to survive and not die off as a species. But there's going to be a huge ecological collapse at some point fairly soon. And so then, it puts us into this sort of living afterlife. Is sort of how I think about it. I don't know. So a place like the Meadowlands are already kind of they've been through that cycle. We destroyed it and now it's actually getting a little better, but it's also in this sort of afterlife state. It's like undead in a way. The landscape's been so modified that it'll never quite be a completely natural place in the same way that it used to be, not for centuries at least. So afterlife landscapes. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone, but
no, it makes sense to me.
Thinking.
It's like life after certain lives.
Yeah.
But do you think, like, as artists, we create visual evidence or visual poems that would help the people to foster understanding or help to push the changes or help to make the policies? It's very hard for me to decide which categories that we are actually working on. Or is it important at all? So do we need to be clear about what our duties are?
Yeah, that is a big question. Activism through art. Is it effective? Is it useful? I don't know. I mean, if you make a certain kind of thing, it's only going to reach the people who already agree with you. Do you try to address political and like ecological context through your work? But is making art directly about it actually going to change anything? I don't know. That's again why I tried to make something visceral rather than informative, so that it would be felt in a way that short circuits intellectual approach, and can be maybe felt by the viewer and might affect them in a different way than me telling them things.
I guess for me, like art through activism is a very difficult way to achieve this kind of imaginative idea that I have it in my mind. In my work, I tend to draw a lot of violent scenes. I think those violent scenes are coming from wars, are coming from the dislocated populations in the world forced to go on exile because of political situation, because of like environmental situations. And I think I was never, as you did, never being very concrete about, okay, this is the event that I am depicting. Because I always think about when we are making certain visuals, when we are making certain films or drawings, that we are not depicting the victims, that we are not depicting the places which has been damaged, but we are trying to find certain universal connections in between those damaged areas. if I would work with this concept of contamination can mean so many things just in one language. It could be the contamination of the water of the Meadowland. It could be contamination of a sewage system. It could be contamination of smaller scales, a pond next to your like house or something. So I think the ability to always be able to jump into different points that you're interested is very interesting. So make the connections with the contamination side of the Meadowland and then the sewage system in New York, or it's just like the chemical dumps in the like film lab. That gives me such a visceral reaction because then through my visuals or through my storytellings, this one concept could pass through so many people's life that I will never be able to encounter it in the real life. And I think that is what draw me into any sort of art forms, is the ability to imagine things even without being there, even without physically being there. We have the ability to imagine damage, but we also have the ability to imagine something bigger than what we are experiencing it now. And then the ability to imagining damage is something so subtle for me. It's something so visceral for me. It's something that gives me sort of a sense of security in some way, if that makes sense. Because people would always say, why don't you imagine a better future? Why don't you draw or shoot a perfect, clean water side?
Right.
But then it's almost evil to think like that. But that doesn't give you that sort of feeling of beauty or sort of sense of beauty, because the beauty already there. And then kind of the idea of finding beauties in those destructions really interests me.
Yeah, me too. That's, again, like why I was drawn out to these places in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to make this film because I like spending time in the Meadowlands, even though they're a mess. But as you said, also, there's so many. Art is a great tool for having a complex relationship between things and finding complex relationships. And a lot of it isn't literal. My film is still, I was talking about the double index where it is kind of literally recording and literally pulling up those chemicals. But still, I think the way it's presented isn't entirely literal. Even so, I don't tell people what's happening. I let them just experience it. And yeah, I think that's the power of art, is that you don't have to say everything. You can find more powerful ways to get at things that say a lot more actually indirectly.
That's true. And then the ability to see through those waters are very powerful. Because I think nature has its own camouflage too. Yeah. So we wanted to see something a little bit deeper. We want to see the debris underneath, and we want to perceive the chemicals which doesn't exist on the surface of like visuals. And when we really step into the water, I mean, not literally, but like when we investigate using film, using hydrophone to record sound, is that our body and the body of water has intertwined.
Mm.
And this is a very romantic idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. But being out there and doing this is kind of a performance.
Yeah.
I'm doing this very specific process in a place, not just filming, but the process of loading and washing the footage, which I said could go on for hours. So yeah, I'm intertwining with the landscape in a very specific way. Like I'm interacting with it in this hands-on way. My hands go into the water. I put gloves on, but my hands are in those waters doing things. Most people do not interact with the Meadowlands in that way. So even if no one saw the film, there's something meaningful happening just through the act of doing this. This like act of, I don't know, like it's like pseudo-spiritual in a way that has nothing to do with religion, like performing a ritual. It's a ritual. Like it's performing a landscape ritual out in these places that's extremely meaningful to me. And
yeah. And you think about, it's a lot to do with touches, right? You touch the water, but the water touch the film negatives, but the film negatives also get touched by the chemicals in the photo labs, and then eventually the audience eyes are touching the film that they've seen on the screen. It's quite a process of having a very intimate relationship with all those processes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the audience's eyes, because you can't look at something without changing it too. So that is part of the process in a way.
Yeah. But alternation is happening all the time, even without our ability to perceive it. And I think it's very powerful, even though our audience couldn't have such a visual reaction while seeing the film, while seeing visual works, while listening to a concert. But those effects is in the body already. They have been touched in some way that they might not know it at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the hope, that people take something away with them, even if they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's with them always.
I think that's a good ending. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. And we are available on YouTube Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Pocket Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next Sunday. Ciao, ciao. Do you still want to keep working on this concept like Meadowlands in New Jersey area?
I think I would like to make more films about the Meadowlands, yeah. But I also think I want to make more films about water like this, with photochemical film and water chemistry. Again, it doesn't seem like that many people have thought about doing it, which is shocking to me. So I think it's the beginning of a project I'm calling Water Qualities, like the qualities of the water.
Yes.
And then water quality, like the monitoring of contamination and whatnot. But I want to do that in other places. I think you could do this anywhere, really. I could go anywhere in the world and get a unique portrait of a place by washing the footage in the water there.
Wow, that's a great idea, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to experiment with it more. The next ones will probably be right here in New York, because we have things like Gowanus Canal and Newtown Creek, which are also super fun sites right in the city. And theirs are being cleaned up slowly, but I feel like those will have interesting things to tell us if I stick footage into them. Yeah,
and especially when you don't know a very concrete data about how contaminated water is, and you can, when you dump the film into it, it shows visually.
Yeah.
And then the result is not a number. The result is a different color, a filter on the film.
Yeah.
And this filter is kind of undefined, that we don't know, cannot understand it by its literal meaning, like contamination. This contamination is a filter, is a visual filter for the film. I think it's a super interesting idea.
Yeah, it's a qualitative recording device for sure. It's not generating data the same way, but it's still data. And my hope is that versus the sort of cold, hard clarity of numbers, something like qualities of light and color and texture of film penetrate the viewer more deeply in a way.
Yeah.
Like watching footage corrode and fall off the reel as it spools by in a film, I hope will have a direct impact that numbers can't have. So this kind of qualitative recording is still useful and meaningful. Yeah.
Of course, and I feel like we are so far away from contaminated side. Like we live so close by it, but then in our mind, it's not a thing on our mind. It's not a thing. It's not immediate.